The world does not end with a whimper, nor does it end with a bang. It ends with a cycle. Before the concept of history was even written in the scrolls of the Greeks, before the foundations of the Roman Senate were laid, there was a peak of human achievement that defied the constraints of the Bronze Age. This is the story of Thera. But more than that, it is the story of the first time humanity realized that the earth is not our home, it is our host. And sometimes, the host decides to breathe. Imagine a world where the Aegean Sea was not just a body of water, but a highway of liquid sapphire. At the center of this highway sat a circular island of unparalleled beauty, Thera. Today, we know it as Santorini, a postcard of white walls and blue domes. But 3,600 years ago, it was the beating heart of the Minoan Maritime Empire, a civilization so advanced it feels like a glitch in the timeline of human progress. As we walk through the ghost streets of Akrotiri, the main city of the island, the sophistication is staggering. This wasn't a primitive settlement, it was a cosmopolitan marvel that would make later civilizations look archaic. We see three-story villas built with precision ashlar masonry, standing tall against the salt air. We see streets paved with smooth stone, designed for a society that valued order and beauty. And most remarkably, we hear the faint echo of water. The Minoans had developed a drainage system and indoor plumbing so advanced it wouldn't be seen again in Europe for another 2,000 years. Inside these homes, the walls spoke a language of vibrant color. They were covered in frescoes so detailed they seemed to vibrate with life, blue monkeys leaping through papyrus reeds, saffron gatherers with shaved heads and silver earrings, and grand flotillas of ships returning home with the riches of Egypt and the Levant. This was a society of artists, engineers, and dreamers. The Minoans were not warriors of the sword, they were warriors of the spirit and the sea. They traded in tin from the distant north and gold from the south, weaving a web of commerce that connected the known world. They worshipped a goddess of the earth, a mistress of animals who held snakes in her hands as a symbol of life, death, and the eternal rebirth of nature. They lived in a state of Pax Minoica, a Minoan peace. There were no walls around their cities because their walls were the wooden hulls of the greatest navy the world had ever seen. They felt invincible. They felt eternal. But this paradise was built on a lie. The very soil that gave them their unique, volcanic wine and their fertile crops was a gift from a monster sleeping beneath their feet. The island of Thera was not just an island, it was the rim of a massive, prehistoric volcanic complex that had been silent for 18,000 years. For centuries, the mountain remained a silent witness to their glory. The people built their temples on its slopes, harvested its obsidian, and used its pumice to polish their tools. They mistook the volcano's long silence for its death. But deep beneath the cobblestone streets of Akrotiri, the earth was beginning to boil. The first signs of the end didn't come from the sky, but from the marrow of the island itself. It began with the Great Tremors. In the year 1628 BCE, the earth began to stutter. It wasn't just a single earthquake, but a relentless swarm of tectonic screams. Magma, viscous and gas-rich, was tearing its way through the crust, building pressure like 1,000 steam engines trapped in a single, stone room. The frescoes began to crack. The magnificent plumbing snapped. The people, terrified, fled to the open squares, watching as their masterpieces crumbled into dust. Archaeological evidence shows us something haunting: there are no bodies in the ruins of Akrotiri. Unlike the victims of Pompeii who were caught in their beds, the people of Thera listened to the earth. They saw the wells dry up as the heat intensified. They felt the ground rising through the soles of their sandals. They began a massive, organized evacuation, packing their most precious belongings, their bronze tools, their painted jars, their sacred icons, and they boarded their ships, sailing away into the blue horizon. Then, there was a period of agonizing silence. A week, perhaps a month, where the earth stopped shaking. Some daring souls, thinking the anger of the gods had passed, returned to the harbor to begin the reconstruction. We see their work today: walls partially rebuilt, piles of rubble moved to the side of the road, hammers left where they fell. They thought they were safe. They thought the worst was over. They were wrong. The tremors were merely a clearing of the throat. The vents were opening, and a light dusting of white ash began to fall from the sky like a cold, toxic snow. It coated the vineyards and choked the lungs of the livestock. The sky began to change color, the Aegean blue replaced by a sickly, bruised purple. The birds went silent, and the only sound was a low, rhythmic thrumming that resonated in the chest of every living being. The Minoan Golden Age had reached its final hour. The era of the real-world apocalypse was beginning, and as the first massive plume of ash broke through the summit, reaching 30 miles toward the stars, the people realized that the Earth was no longer their host, it had become their executioner. The shadow was growing, the sea was restless, and the fire was coming. This was the moment the world changed forever, and as we transition into the heart of the fire, we realized that this was only the beginning of a chain reaction that would erase an empire and give birth to a legend that still haunts our dreams today. The sky did not just turn black, it ceased to exist. As the pressure beneath the island reached its breaking point, the crust of Thera finally gave way, and the mountain didn't just erupt, it detonated with the force of 40 Hiroshima-sized atomic bombs every single second. This was the moment of the Plinian phase, a volcanic scream that propelled a column of superheated ash, pulverized rock, and toxic gases 30 miles into the atmosphere. It pierced the stratosphere, spreading out like a giant, cancerous mushroom that blotted out the sun for over 1,000 miles. Day became a midnight so thick you could feel it against your skin. The air itself became a weapon, filled with jagged glass-like shards of tephra that shredded the lungs of anything left alive. In this darkness, the world was no longer defined by sight, but by the terrifying, deafening roar of a planet tearing itself apart. Then came the physics of true horror, the pyroclastic flows. As the massive column of ash became too heavy for the air to support, it collapsed under its own weight, cascading down the slopes of the volcano at 300 miles per hour. These were avalanches of fire and gas, reaching temperatures of 1,500 degrees Fahrenheit. They moved with a predatory fluid intelligence, racing across the surface of the ocean, cushioned by a layer of steam, vaporizing the very ships the Minoans had hoped would be their salvation. Nothing could outrun it. Nothing could hide from it. The magnificent villas of Akrotiri, already weakened by the tremors, were not just buried, they were sealed in a tomb of pumice and ash that would keep them frozen in time for 3.5 millennia. But the volcano was not finished with its masterpiece of destruction. The heart of the island, the great magma chamber that had supported the Minoan paradise, was now empty. The roof of the volcano, unable to sustain its own massive weight, collapsed into the void below. Thousands of billions of tons of rock plummeted into the sea in a single, catastrophic instant. This collapse created the caldera, the iconic giant hole in the sea that we see today. But in 1600 BCE, it triggered something much more lethal. As the Mediterranean rushed in to fill the vacuum where an island used to be, it birthed a series of tsunamis that would rewrite the geography of the ancient world. These were not mere waves, they were walls of water, 50 to 100 feet high, moving at the speed of a jet engine. They raced southward toward Crete, the seat of Minoan power, carrying with them the debris of a shattered civilization. When these walls of water hit the northern coast of Crete, the destruction was absolute. The great palaces of Knossos and Malea, though miles inland, felt the earth shake as the sea invaded the land. The Minoan navy, the pride of the Bronze Age and the shield of their empire, was lifted from the harbors and smashed against the hillsides like toys. The fertile coastal plains, which provided the food for the entire civilization, were poisoned by saltwater and buried under layers of marine silt and volcanic ash. In a single afternoon, the economic, military, and agricultural spine of the Minoan world was snapped. The survivors, standing on the ash-covered hills of Crete, looked north to see only a void where the sacred island of Thera had once stood. Their gods were dead, their ships were gone, and the sun had been stolen from the sky. But the catastrophe was not local. The ash cloud drifted east, choking the Nile Delta in Egypt and casting a shadow over the empires of Mesopotamia. Ancient Chinese chronicles would later speak of a yellow fog and a dim sun that caused crops to fail and frosts to strike in the middle of July. The global temperature plummeted as the volcanic sulfur particles reflected the sun's heat back into space. This was a volcanic winter, a period of starvation and chaos that triggered the first domino in the Great Bronze Age collapse. The Minoans, once the masters of the sea, were now ghosts in their own land, vulnerable to the rising tide of warriors from the north who saw the smoke in the distance and realized the masters were gone. As we look at the boiling sea and the falling ash, we must realize that this event was so traumatic, so incomprehensibly violent, that it could not be contained in history books. It had to become a myth. It had to become a warning. The story of a great island, rich in gold and wisdom, swallowed by the sea in a single day and night of misfortune, began to circulate in the whispers of survivors. This is where the memory of Thera begins its long journey into the mind of a philosopher named Plato. The fire of the eruption had gone out, but the smoke was beginning to take the shape of a legend, the legend of Atlantis. And as we move from the physical destruction into the haunting mystery of the aftermath, we find ourselves asking, if we found the ruins once, are we prepared for the moment the cycle begins again? The tremors have stopped for now, but the silence is the most dangerous part of the loop. The fire had settled, and the waves had retreated, but the world that remained was a skeleton of its former self. To understand the magnitude of the Minoan eruption, we must look beyond the charred rocks of Santorini and into the very soul of Western civilization. For centuries, humanity treated the story of Atlantis as a beautiful lie, a philosophical fable invented by Plato to illustrate the hubris of man. But as we dig through the layers of volcanic ash, the line between myth and reality begins to dissolve. Plato described a circular island empire, a marvel of engineering and naval power, that existed beyond the Pillars of Hercules and vanished into the depths of the ocean in a single day and night of misfortune. When you look at the bathymetry of the Santorini caldera, the concentric rings of stone and the sheer scale of the collapse, you aren't looking at a geological formation. You are looking at the blueprint of a legend. The timeline matches with haunting precision. Plato claimed Atlantis vanished 9,000 years before his time, a date that many scholars dismissed as an exaggeration. However, in the ancient Egyptian records that Plato's sources relied upon, the lunar and solar calendars were often confused, and the translation of thousands versus hundreds changed everything. When adjusted, the date of Atlantis's fall aligns perfectly with the eruption of Thera. The description of the rocks, red, black, and white, is the exact color palette of the cliffs of modern-day Santorini. The Minoans didn't just disappear, they were transformed into a ghost story. Their sophisticated world was so far ahead of its time that when it was destroyed, the survivors could only explain it as a divine execution. The memory of the Great Eruption became the foundation of the Atlantis myth, a trauma so deep it was etched into the collective subconscious of humanity for 3,000 years. But the fall of the Minoans was only the first domino in a global catastrophe known as the Bronze Age collapse. This was the first real-world global economic crisis. The Minoans were the middlemen of the ancient world. They moved the tin from the west and the copper from the east that, when combined, created bronze, the oil of the ancient world. When the Minoan fleet was vaporized and their ports were buried under tsunami silt, the supply chain of the Mediterranean snapped. Without bronze, weapons could not be forged, tools could not be made, and empires could not be defended. The Mycenaean Greeks, the Hittites in Anatolia, and even the new kingdom of Egypt began to wobble. The Sea People, a mysterious confederation of displaced refugees and raiders, began to swarm the Mediterranean like vultures circling a dying beast. Imagine the psychological terror of this era. The sun remained dim for years. The crops failed season after season as the volcanic sulfur caused a volcanic winter that chilled the earth. People who had lived in organized, literate societies for centuries suddenly found themselves starving in the dark. Writing systems, like the Minoan Linear A, simply vanished. The art of fresco painting, the knowledge of advanced plumbing, and the secrets of celestial navigation were forgotten. Humanity entered a dark age that lasted 300 years, a period of silence where the only history was kept alive by oral poets who sang of monsters, floods, and the anger of the gods. The eruption of Thera didn't just destroy an island, it hit the reset button on human progress. This is the true tragedy of the Bronze Age collapse. It proves that civilization is a fragile veneer, a thin layer of glass over a boiling cauldron. We look at the ruins of Knossos or the buried walls of Akrotiri and we see a mirror. They thought they were too big to fail. They thought their technology made them masters of the elements. But the earth is a patient player. It allows us to build, to dream, and to thrive in the quiet intervals between its breaths. The Minoans were the first to learn that the environment is the ultimate architect of history. Their end was the beginning of our world. The world of the Greeks and Romans was built on the ashes of the people of the bull. Yet, as we trace the connection between the ash and the ink of Plato's scrolls, we realize that the loop is not yet closed. The story of Atlantis is not a story of the past, it is a warning for the future. It tells us that what has happened once will happen again, and that the ocean is a vast graveyard of empires that thought they were eternal. As we stand on the edge of the caldera today, looking down into the blue water that swallowed a world, we must ask ourselves, what will the people 3,000 years from now say about us? Will we be a history, or will we be a myth? The transition from the ghost of Atlantis to the reality of our modern world is a narrow path, and the mountain is starting to whisper again. The silence of Santorini today is not the silence of peace, it is the silence of a held breath. As we stand on the sun-drenched cliffs of Oia, watching the cruise ships navigate the deep blue waters of the caldera, it is easy to succumb to the illusion of safety. We tell ourselves that we are different from the Minoans. We have satellites, seismographs, and the collective knowledge of 3 millennia. But beneath the surface, the physics of the Earth remain unchanged. Just 5 miles off the coast of the picturesque villages lies Colombo, an underwater volcano that is currently active, breathing, and recharging. Its magma chamber is filling as we speak, growing at a rate that defies our sense of security. The real-world apocalypse was not a one-time event, it was a rehearsal for a performance that has no final curtain. This is the terror of the circularity of time. We believe history is a straight line, a constant march of progress toward an invulnerable future. But the geology of the Aegean tells a different story, a story of the eternal return. The Minoans were not a primitive people who fell because they lacked our technology, they were a pinnacle of their era who fell because they occupied a space that the Earth occasionally needs to reclaim. Every few thousand years, the tectonic plates of Africa and Eurasia engage in a violent struggle, and every time, the islands of the Aegean are the casualties. We are currently living in the quiet window, a brief intermission in a play that has been running for hundreds of thousands of years. The tourists who walk the streets of modern Santorini are walking the same path as the saffron gatherers of 1600 BCE, oblivious to the fact that the ground beneath them is a lid on a pressure cooker. The myth of Atlantis persists because it is an unfinished story. It is a ghost that haunts our collective memory because we know, deep in our genetic code, that the sea is still hungry. When we look at the Bronze Age collapse, we see the blueprint for our own potential fragility. Our global supply chains, our digital empires, our coastal cities, they are all susceptible to the same domino effect that toppled the palaces of Crete. A single catastrophic event in the Mediterranean would not just be a local tragedy, it would be a global systemic failure. We are more connected than the Minoans ever were, which means we are more vulnerable to the ripple effects of the fire and the wave. The shadow of the giant hasn't disappeared, it has simply shifted its position. The loop is tightening. As we study the ash, we are also writing the script for our own descendants to read. We find ourselves trapped in a beautiful, terrifying cycle of building and burying, of dreaming and drowning. There is no final chapter to this story because the Earth does not recognize the concept of an ending. It only recognizes the process of transformation. The mountains will fall into the sea will rise to meet the sky, and the civilizations of man will be ground into the pumice that will pave the streets of the next great empire. We are not the masters of this world, we are its temporary tenants, and our lease is subject to the whims of the fire below. So we wait. We build our villas on the edges of the abyss. We paint our walls and we trade our goods, pretending that the tremors are just the wind. But the mountain is patient. It doesn't care about our calendars or our gods. It waits for the pressure to become unbearable. It waits for the moment when the blue water must again be replaced by the bruising purple of the ash cloud. And as the sun begins to dim once more, and the first white dust begins to fall like toxic snow over the vineyards, we realize that we have been here before. We have seen this sky. We have felt this shaking. And we find ourselves back at the beginning, standing in the shadow of a paradise that was never meant to last. We return to the jewel of the Aegean. To the city of frescoes. To the golden age that defies the constraints of time. Because the world does not end with a whimper, nor does it end with a bang. It ends with a cycle. Before the concept of history was even written in the scrolls of the Greeks.
Before you leave, subscribe, like, and share, so the truth is never lost.